function 1 plus 2. In this case, instead of actually returning the sum in the other function, you are returning another function that does something else, right? And then we have callbacks. Callbacks and higher order functions are related. So the function that you actually send to a high order function as an argument is called a callback. So this actually gets executed inside the block of the high order function. And then we have promises. So promises, I remember Caesar did explain this in terms of why when you try to check the type of an array, it returns an object instead of an array. Well, JavaScript is kind of a weird programming language. Most things in JavaScript are actually objects. That's why an array is an object, even though it is actually different from an object. Even the way you look at the syntax is different from one and the other. With the promise, it's also an object, but then this returns a value when a block of code is successfully executed, or it returns an error if it fails, right? I don't think I'm going to focus on this today. I might leave it for one of our sessions next week because this gets a bit more complicated compared to what I have planned for you today. So before I continue, I just want to make sure that we are on the same page in terms of what I just presented. Do we have any questions? Does anyone need any clarity?
Seems like we don't have. Okay, we have a question from Lavoyo. Lavoyo.
Hello. Yeah.
Hello, Lavoyo.
Yes, we
Can
can
you
hear
hear
you,
me?
Lavoyo.
Okay. So in terms of higher order functions, is it possible for a function to call itself?
Technically, yes, but now you're actually looking at something called recursive programming. So it depends on what it is that you're actually trying to achieve. Um, if you want to keep on calling the function until a specific condition is met, and then that's when it's going to end the function call, then you can actually do that. But we're not going to be doing that today, but that's something called recursive programming. So yes.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Thanks for the question. Do you have any other question? Looks like we're good.
No, we don't have any questions.
All right. Cool then. So I think this is pretty much it in terms of the presentation. So now I am going to open this guy right here for the example that I actually wanted to show you guys, right? So remember I said that Node.js actually allows JavaScript to run outside of the browser and all of that. Well, I'm not sure how many people have used Netflix as an application, but I am going to open my DevTools. And mind you, this is an application on its own, but I am going to open DevTools. I'm going to right click and then go to inspect. Now, when we inspect this, as you can see, this is all HTML. This is not different from what you guys were actually doing with your HTML and your CSS and as well as JavaScript, mostly when it comes to the console. When Caesar was actually debugging or showing you the code execution, whether it succeeded or it failed, this is the window he was opening. But as you can see down here, this is actually Netflix. And then on the side, the DevTools is actually open on Edge. And if I open my task manager here and I come to this guy and I click on end task, as you can see, even Netflix actually disappears. So this is the power of Node.js. This is an application that's actually utilizing Node.js, as well as those who are on Slack. The application that you're actually using was built with Node.js as well, in conjunction with Electron, if I'm not mistaken, as well as VS Code. Those applications are using Node.js. But if you have seen, there is a bit of a disadvantage sometimes in terms of building applications with Node.js and JavaScript. They tend to not be as fast as native applications. So by native applications, I mean that they are not utilizing the languages that are actually meant specifically for that environment. For example, when it comes to Android, you have Java, you have Kotlin. When it comes to iOS, you have your Swift, you also have Objective-C. When it comes to Windows, there's your C Sharp, as well as other languages that are utilized by Microsoft, and so on and so forth. So there's a bit of a drawback when it comes to that if you are ever going to be building applications using Node.js. So just something that you need to be aware of. They are also power hungry in terms of RAM, because they still need to spin up that engine. So that's pretty much it in terms of the first part. Now let's go ahead and actually not create, but install our Node.js application so that we can actually use it in our pieces. So for this is where I am. You can just go straight to this, download the LTS. LTS, by the way, is short for long-term support. If you always want to make sure you're downloading stable software, always go with LTS. I know with most applications that you're installing, this is never there, but when it comes to dev applications, this in most cases is always going to be an option. So you can actually go for beta if you want to go with beta. For example, this is the most recent, but it's not as stable as this guy. So if you're on Windows, this is how you install that. But this side, you have more options for other operating systems. As you can see, there's Mac, Linux. You can also change the version that you want. You can go all the way down to 0.12.18. But I'm not going to do that. I have this. If you want to install, you can just click on that and open it. I do not need to do this because I already have Node installed. So you can go ahead and get started with that installation. I'm going to give you guys maybe about 20 seconds to finish that installation. And then we're going to get started with the actual coding. Okay, I think 20 minutes, not 20 minutes, 20 seconds is up. So you guys should be done with installation, hopefully, so we can continue. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to open my terminal because I love using the terminal. I am in this path right here in a folder called online tutorial. So this is where we are actually going to be creating our application. But just to double check, Mahlati, can you see the text here? Or do I need to zoom in?
Please zoom in. Yes.
Here
Yeah.
or here?
You can zoom in a bit. Yeah. Thank you.
Oh, kind of feels like I cannot see by the way this is zoomed in. But anyway, let's get started. So what I'm going to do here is create a folder. You can still create a folder using your file explorer, just that I prefer using the terminal in most cases. So we're going to create a folder called, you can just call it Node tutorial. By the way, this is make directory. In other ways, create folder. This is a CMD command. So we're gonna go ahead now and cd change directory to our Node tutorial. And then for those who are only installing Node today, in order to double check the version, it's Node-V. As you can see, I'm actually using 20.18. Wait a second. Okay, I'm actually behind by one LTS version, but that is no deal breaker. So you guys are going to have 22. I'm going to use 20. But in terms of what we need to do, functionality is still going to be the same. So now, in order to create a Node application, you have to write npm init, and then it's going to prompt you to actually write a few things. I'm just going to press enter for everything. It wants a package name. I'm just going to leave it as tutorial. I'm just going to leave this as they are. And at the end, it's asking me if this is okay. I'm going to say yes. And then let's clear that. We're done with that part. Now we are going to go ahead and open this with VS Code. So this looks too big, and I feel like I still need to zoom in. Okay, so this is the first thing that you need to be aware of when it comes to Node, right? The prompt that it was actually asking of us, all that information that we entered on, or we actually didn't do anything much in terms of that. This is where it actually comes. It's called package.json. So this has details about the application, how to run your application. Right now we have scripts, which is test that, which I'm not going to use. If you're going to be installing anything, this is where it's also going to be placed. But in our case for today, we don't have anything. I will show you when we're actually done installing in our second session. So this is where all the information goes. But as you can see, it didn't actually create a file for us. But like I said, this utilizes JavaScript. So that means we're going to create a JavaScript file. In most cases, the entry file for web applications is index.html. So most applications, when it comes to Node, they've carried the tradition through and they use index.js. Can you use any other file name? Yes, that's all up to you. But it's common practice to stick to index.js. Everyone recognizes this as the entry file. So Matlati, can I zoom out a bit? This is too big. Like if I'm here, can you still see?
Yes, I can still see.
All right, cool. Um, I need to open the terminal. So that was not going to allow me to do everything that I actually need to do. In order to run the terminal or to actually open this guy right here, since it's a Node file, you come to the terminal. If you want, you can actually still write it this side, but there's no need for me to use this guy if I already have the integrated terminal this side. So we are going to write node dash dash watch and then index.js. And the reason we're doing this, Node is basically telling us that we want to start interacting with Node. And when we have the file name, we are saying use Node to open this file, right? And then with the dash dash watch, we want to listen to the changes as they happen on our file so that I don't have to come back and keep on restarting. So we have that, as you can see, completed running in index.js. So our file is set up, we are done, right? With the easiest part. Now we are going to go into all the other things that I was talking about, the high order functions, the calling of functions, and all of that. So for this, we are going to simply create a function called sum and that. So I remember C's were using the function keyword when creating functions, but it also did say that this is the other way of creating a function, and this is called an arrow function. I usually prefer using this. I don't remember the last time I actually used the other way of creating functions. So we're going to have sum. We are going to have A and B. So these are going to be our arguments. And then what we're going to do here is simply return A plus B. All right, we save that. Nothing is happening. As you can see, it says restarting. So it is listening to changes that are happening on the file, but nothing is coming out. Cool. Let's go ahead and say, actually, let's just go straight to the console log. We're going to sum this, and then we can send it to variables. We save that, and then we have our 35, right? You are still familiar with this way of doing your functions. Now, what we can do here is we can actually create another argument. I'm going to call it a callback. Sometimes this is just called CB. So when you go through other people's code bases and you see CB, in most cases, that's actually going to be a callback. So keep that in mind. And then for this, what we are going to do here, we're going to create another function, and then we're just going to call this callback. It doesn't have to be the same name that we're using on the other side. Remember, they don't conflict. So in terms of this, we're just going to console log done edit, right? And then this side, we can actually have that callback. So that means it's actually going to do this. Actually, let me do it this way. Let sum of 2, because I already have sum at the top, equals A plus B. And then after that, we're going to have the callback, and then we return the actual sum. So if we do this, callback is not a function. That's because I did not pass it. Right, so let's save that. And then as you can see, it now says done adding, and then we have our 35. So what's happening this side is we are not calling the function anywhere here. We're sending it as an argument to another function, and then we are actually executing it in that function. And that's why when we pass it, we are passing it without any brackets. So we are not doing any of this. We are just passing it as a name, and then we get to execute it wherever we actually want to call it, right? So this is the callback because it's a function that is actually being passed as an argument, and that this makes this guy to be a high order function. So sum becomes a high order function y because it accepts a function as an argument. Okay, so this is our high order function because it's accepting a function as an argument. In this case, this becomes our function. But there's two ways to actually write this code that you are going to see a lot, mostly when it comes to when you're working with Node.js. So what way is that, right? Let's go ahead and have another console log down here. Now we're going to say 300. Instead of actually having a function right at the top, we can go ahead and actually write it down here. So we're going to say the second callback. We save that. As you can see, it first runs that, and then it runs the second one. We have second callback, and then we have our sum. So this is what's called a nameless function, but it is still a callback because we're sending it as an argument. You are going to see this quite a lot. It's also there in JavaScript, by the way, but sometimes we just write code without fully understanding the terms behind the concepts that we're actually using. So this is high order, but thing is, I don't really have a proper, let me see. We have that, we have sum of two. We are not actually doing much with that, so let us see if we can actually have another example whereby we are actually returning a function. Right, so this side, function as return value. Let me actually close. Should I close or change where it's docked? Panel position, panel position. I'm gonna move this to the right. I don't need a lot of space at the moment, and then I'm gonna close the left panel so that I have more space at the bottom. So for this is going to be a dumb example, by the way, right? So just pay attention to the concepts, not the actual information here, because I couldn't come up with a great example for this. So let's say we have a function, maybe let's just say return func, right? And then here we just want to return an actual function. So in this case, we are going to return this, and then we can say, actually, let's have a console log saying, hey there. And then let's save that, still running. Let's come down here, console log our function, which is return func, right? And then as you can see, what happens is our actual value is not the console log in this case, but it's just showing function anonymous, right? So in order to actually get that, let's have rt equals to return func, and then we are going to call rt down here. And there we are. So for the lack of a better example, this is what I would come up with. But this became our return value, and this is a function. So this also makes a return func to be a high order function. So this is also a high order function. Why? Because it returns the function as the value. Right? So what you get to do with this is you do whatever calculations or whatever executions you actually want here. And then when that function gets returned, you then can call it wherever else. So this is the main function, which is this parent, but then this represents that. So that's why we can now call it here. I hope so far we are together. And the reason I'm showing the callback is because we need to focus on the timers also. So for now, I'll just save this because I do not want my code to be all over the place. And then, do I need anything here? Nope, I do not. Now I'm going to create another file called timers, right? Timers.js. And then I'm going to stop this. And then we'll run the timers. So remember I said the timers actually allow us to control the execution of our code. For example, let's say we have a set timeout. So this is a timer that actually allows us to set the time frame we want to wait before we execute a block of code. In this case, we can use 3000. And when it comes to these values, we can say the interval is in ms, and ms equals to 1 second, 1000 ms equals to 1 second. So this basically means it's going to wait 3 seconds. And remember what I was telling you before in terms of the callbacks. This is a high order function, but it's built in, so we didn't have to create it, but it's accepting a callback. So we are setting a callback, and then the second parameter or the second argument becomes the interval we need to wait before we actually execute the function. So here we can just say in set timeout. Let's save that. And then pay attention to this. You saw how long we actually had to wait. Roughly about 3 seconds, right? And what happens here, remember the non-blocking and the blocking code that I was talking about? What we can do here is we can actually have another console log, and we can say waiting for timeout. What you're going to see, this code comes first, but funny thing is this will actually get executed first. So we have the waiting for timeout, and then we have the in set timeout. But I'm sure this is not that interesting to some of you. I saw through your applications for JavaScript that some of you are actually using this to control your cards. Hopefully you're not using ChatGPT so that you can actually understand what's happening behind the scenes. And then what we can also do, there's another timer. This is, let's set a comment here. This is a high order, and I hope I'm not going too fast, by the way. I usually tend to talk too fast when I'm excited, when I'm talking, so let me know if I'm moving too fast. So this is a high order function. It accepts a callback as a first argument. So arg is argument, and then you can say interval as, and I think I'm not using the right way. This is not supposed to be the interval, but anyway, we'll just leave it as is. I'll come back to it when I remember the actual word. And then the interval as the second argument. Let me close the other side. Now we are going to have another one, which is the set interval, right? It's also a high order that repeats every whatever interval is set. So in order to create this, we are going to create a variable to be able to control the timer. And then we're going to call it timer ID. And then that's going to be equals to set interval. And then here we have our callback. And then we also have our timer. So the duration, that's the word I was looking for. This is duration. How long we should actually wait. Right, and then in this case, the duration is 1 second, which is 1000 milliseconds. And then we can say log and then in interval. So remember, this is actually supposed to keep on repeating, right? It repeats endlessly. So the first time it runs is after a second, and then after that, each and every other 1 second, it's actually going to repeat. And then if you pay attention to what's happening here, we had the first one, we had the second, and then before we went to the third, we had the set timeout actually coming back to us, and then we went back to the interval, and then we continued with the interval. And this keeps on executing. So it keeps on repeating. And that's why we actually needed to set this variable so that we can actually be able to control it. So in order for this to actually make sense, I am going to put this right below this, and then take this below this guy. And then we are going to remove this, right? So insert timeout, and then after these calls, we want to remove the interval. So we call clear interval, and then we pass it the variable that we've actually set. So this is an identifier for this specific interval, and then it allows us to actually stop the execution. As you can see, it just keeps on running endlessly. So let's go ahead and save that. Waiting for timeout, in interval, insert timeout, and then it stops. So this is how you clear the interval that is actually set here. So this depends on what it is that you're actually trying to do. If you're writing a script that is checking for a specific condition, you can keep on using this guy until it's met. If it's met, then use the clear interval to actually stop the execution. So in this case, this is kind of a hack. I'm using the two timers to actually communicate with one another. And I hope so far we are good. So remember what I was talking about in terms of the asynchronous and synchronous, right? This waiting for timeout doesn't actually block anything. This can continue running forever and ever and ever and ever and ever and ever. Okay, I actually wanted it to go down, not sideways. Right, waiting for timeout. as you can see, it just went from one line to the next. So this is actually not waiting for anything else. It just goes straight to the point. This, however, waits for a timer, but at the same time, it doesn't block the execution of this code as well as this. It doesn't block the execution of the rest of the code. So this is what's called asynchronous. However, with synchronous code, you actually have it go from one line to the next, which in this case is this guy over here. Right, I do not have enough time to actually go into writing everything, but in terms of what you guys were doing last week? Yes, last week with Caesar, most of the code that he was actually writing was synchronous. It goes line by line and it waits for that to be executed before it continues on to the next line. But with the timers allow us to actually escape from that. We also have another one called, what is this? It's the promises. The promises also allow us to actually escape asynchronous code, but it's a bit complex, like I said, so I'm not going to be touching on that today. So since you understand how these timers work, you understand this part a bit in terms of the callbacks, hopefully you understand how this part works. I think maybe, just maybe, we might be ready to actually build an actual server using Node. So just to double check if there are no questions in terms of the high order functions, the callbacks, what else? The timers. We might not be using timers today, as well as the promises, but we'll keep on going because we're going to be building one application throughout the Node.js sessions. So, Mahlatsi, can you confirm if there are any questions for me, or can I continue to the headache section of the session?
Seems like we're still all good. I don't see any hands up. We don't have any questions on the Q&A, so you can proceed.
All right. Okay. So everything that I was just covering right now are things that hopefully you got introduced to while you're doing your own research in terms of JavaScript, but they are very important to actually understand when it comes to Node. That's why I thought, let me just start off with those. We are going to be building a server. Actually, not necessarily a server, we're building server-side code because those tend to be interchangeable and people actually confuse the two. So we're going to call this server.js and then I'll stop the execution of that. By the way, in terms of stopping the execution, on the terminal, you just have to press Control and C, and then it's going to stop the execution. Just realized I actually didn't touch on that before. So now we are going straight to the powers of Node. We have covered the basics. We are done with that part. Right. So when it comes to this, we have, remember what I spoke about in terms of the modules? We have a module called HTTP. This comes straight from Node itself. So we're going to require this from Node HTTP. And this comes from Node itself, so we don't actually have to install. And this just allows us to actually use the HTTP protocols. So let's look at those, right? In HTTP, it's a protocol that allows us to actually communicate over the net or communicate with APIs. And we have something called HTTP methods. These are how APIs or applications actually know what you're trying to do on the system. And there's four main methods that you need to be aware of. There is get, there is post, there's, I was about to write method, there is post, there's delete, and then there is put and patch. So I know I said four. This basically do more or less the same thing. They just differ in terms of what the several things you're trying to do. One is supposed to be updating the whole resource. Meanwhile, one updates a section of the resource. So this is the CRUD functionality that Caesar was also talking about before. But in terms of the HTTP methods, get becomes read, post becomes create, delete in most cases is the same thing. It's delete or remove, and then put is basically update. So that's why he said you need to actually be familiar with CRUD. Even though I didn't put this in order, but CRUD, C-R-U-D, this is what you actually need to be familiar with because you're going to be seeing this everywhere. And when it comes to working with Node.js, it becomes very, very, very important because we need to know exactly what it is that you're trying to do against or on the server. So get, you are reading, right? You're trying to retrieve information. So with get, you're trying to retrieve information from the server. At this point, you don't really care where the information is coming from. It could be the server could be retrieving it from a database or from another server. All you're trying to do is you're telling the server that this is the kind of information that I want. Please go ahead and actually get it for me. And then we also have post. Post, you are sending info to the server. And you can also send information using get, but it's not recommended. The post is more secure because it actually encrypts your information so that it's actually not easy for people to actually hijack and read the packets, the data packets that you're sending to the server. And then we also have delete. Here you're trying to remove something, or we can say data from a database, right? And then with the other one, put or patch, you are updating a resource on the database. So in this case, this could be anything. Example could be updating a user's email address on their profile. So you're updating one part of their information, or sometimes you're updating everything. Depends on which one you'll be using over there. So these are the methods that you actually need to be familiar with. Now, going back to this, we are not going to be using the simpler way of setting up a server, which is what I prefer because we always need to know the basics of something. So this way is a little bit more challenging, a little bit all over the place, makes it hard to actually read sometimes. So we need to actually set up the host name as well as the actual port that we need to use. And I'll show you what those two actually are. in a second. So we have 001. This is on your PC, right? This is localhost. So this is on your PC. We also have a port. So the port in this case, the default that people use for server, what is this, Node.js servers is usually 3000. So I'm going to stick with that. Okay, sorry about that. And then here, what we're going to do is create the actual server, create the instance of the server. So this is going to be HTTP dot. So remember, this is a module, and I did say that with a module, you have a bunch of interrelated functions, right? So the function that we're looking for here is called create server, this function. And then in this function, remember I mentioned the callbacks. We need to actually send a callback as our argument. So in this callback, we are going to have the status code. So this is going to be 200. We need to set up what kind of data it's actually going to be sending back. So we're going to set the header. There's content type. I'm going to set this to application, JSON. I know I'll have to come back to actually explain some of this, right? And then we have rest.end. So in this case, we are going to have JSON.string. Wait, I actually don't need this here. This is just 200. So we can leave that as is for now. And then down here, what we're going to have is server, and then we're going to use another function called listen. So that the listen, the server is just that you've created a variable, but we are not actually telling it to listen to anything that's trying to be done against it. So with the listen, that's where you now actually tell it that I want to listen to this specific part, and then this is the host name that we're going to be on. And then we have another callback. In the callback, we can just say server running. You don't always need this, but it is important for you to actually know if you've set up the server properly and if it is running successfully. Let me see. Address already in use. Seems like I forgot to close one of my applications, so I'm going to come back here and update that to 3001. And as you can see, we have our server running. So remember the port as well as this side. I am going to, I didn't cover this. I'm going to be using a tool called Postman to be testing the API that I'm actually creating. For that, you can go to Postman and then you can download. So this allows you to actually test your API as you are busy developing. Come to download Postman. And this is what it's going to look like. I think I'm using the dark version. But anyway, this is where you're going to download. Regardless of the operating system that you use, you should have that option. If you're using Linux, you can come down here and actually choose your other variant of the application. Right, so while you guys are setting that up, I'm going to continue testing my application. So remember, we had hostname 127.0.0.1. That is the local PC or home, which is equivalent to localhost. And then the port comes after the colon, and then you actually have your port right there. So let us go ahead and send that. As you can see, we have our content type. I set it to application JSON. So as you can see, this is our JSON and our status is 200. Okay. Now, what does that mean exactly? We have status codes. Let me see if I can actually just put this here. Status codes. These are numbers we use to identify if our processes are successful or if there's an error. So for those who have worked on other applications, even if you're working on the front end to communicate with an API, let me do that. To communicate with an API, you will have seen that you do have the status codes, which actually tell you different things. We have 200, which means okay. We have 204, which means whatever you wanted to create has actually been created. We have, these are not the only ones, by the way. There's always more, but I'm focusing on the popular ones. This means URL not found. So this can be URL or resource, depending on what kind of application you're working on. We also have 500. We hate this guy. We hate this guy because it means there's something wrong. Something is wrong on the server itself. So when we see this, that means you actually need to go back to your code and fix something. So we usually don't like this. We also have 403. This is for authentication. This is authentication related. It means not authorized, if I'm not mistaken. Authorized, yes, not authorized. So these are the most common status codes. You can go look into the other HTTP status codes that actually exist, but these are the most common that we come into contact with on a daily basis when we're working on applications. And those are the ones that we're going to be using right now. And then in terms of the header, all requests that you make to actually, I need to do something real quick. Boom, boom, boom. Okay, just open. Give me a second. Seems like my network is stuttering at the moment. So we are not watching anything. We are not watching anything. I want to show you guys this. Right, when it comes to your network, you always have all these requests that are actually coming in and out. So when it comes to the network request, there's something called a header, which is where you actually set up, oh, there's so many requests here. Let me see if I can get one. Okay, it's not showing up exactly how okay, there it is. The request URL, so these are the headers, right? You have the request method, which was a GET request. You have the status code, you have the address, you have the referral policy. You also have all this other information. So this is information that the server actually requires to be able to identify who actually made the request. So in this case, It checks the date that you actually made the request, the time, the origin, so website, or sometimes it can also be the IP address, domain, if it's actually being requested from another website, and other information like how you actually want to send your authentication tokens from one place to the next. In the case of my application, I'm actually just setting up the content type. The content type meaning what kind of data format are we going to actually be using to communicate with one another. That's why this side you saw the JSON. If I come back this side and I change this to, we hardly use this by the way, but it's text plain, not plain, plain, and then I go back to Postman. If I make the request, notice how now it just goes to raw. There are different content types, by the way. You can also send back HTML, XML, other information. It depends on what it is that you're trying to do. But in the case of an API, in this day and age at least, your API in most cases will be sending back information in the type of JSON. So this is how you set it up. But these are not the only options that you have in terms of setting up your headers. And then with rest.end, you're actually telling it to terminate the communication. If I remove this guy, let's go back. As you can see, it says server running, right? If I hit send, it's just going to continuously run because it doesn't know that we've actually reached the end of the communication. So in order to actually tell it to terminate, we have rest.end. And if you want to send information back to whoever is calling your endpoint, I just use another term. I need to come back to that. Let me just write that right here real quick. To tell you to actually send back to whoever is making communication with the endpoint, this is how you do that, and you can actually send data back, right? So if we had, say, we can stringify, and then we can say, that's not how that is. This is supposed to be an object. So we can say message, for example, and then you can say done. We come to Postman, we send, and then we now have that message showing up. Right, so this is how you can actually send back information when data is actually trying to be fetched and whatever. But right now, I know I'm just using it right there. Let's say we wanted to, okay, I'm not going to go to the top. Let's say we had data. We're going to pretend this is coming from our database, but this is static, right? Let's say we have students, and then we have our students, we have V, we have Mr. C's, we have Miss Fifi, we have Miss Nokwanda, right? You can actually come here and then just send the students. And then when you come back to the side to post, and then we now just have an array with all of our information. But obviously, this is usually not how you would actually have your what is this? Your response, because this just goes straight to the array. Like I don't even know what data this is. So it might actually make more sense to have an object and then you call it students. And then so this will become the name of the array or the key. In this case, since this is an object, so this will become the key, and then this is the value. This points directly to this array. Right? I hope you guys are following. You send, and then this is what it looks like. So we have our valid JSON object, which starts as an object because the other way it was actually an array. Meanwhile, this is valid. So we have an object with just students. In the student, with an array of our actual students. So that's how you actually send data back. But in this case, if we come here, we're now on a get method. We send that. We get the information. This is the get, which is okay. We post, we get the same information. We're trying to put same information. Delete, same information. This is not how an API is actually going to be like. One is supposed to be retrieving information, one deletes, one adds, and then one reads, one updates. All right. So that means we actually need to do something here. And with that, we actually need to create if statements. For those who prefer switch cases, you can also use switch cases. But as long as you get the job done, I am going to be sticking to the if statement. So in this case, remember these are called methods, right? So we are going to be checking what method is actually being utilized. So actually, before I come back to this, let's do this. Let's do this. Let's just console log the method. It's always important to actually check what you are doing before you go ahead and keep on doing things, because sometimes you are creating bugs on bugs on bugs. So we have the delete method, therefore we know this is how you actually get the method, right? So that means our if statement is actually valid, and then we're going to use the three equal signs, and then you can even use the double, they should work. And then we are going to say, if you are trying to post, go ahead and return this. So in this case, I'm going to copy some of this information and I'm going to rewrite it. So if you're trying to post, we are going to say 204 to say it has been created, and then we're going to have that. And then, wait a second. There's something that I actually want to do, but I am not so sure if it's gonna work, but we'll give it a try. So in this case, this is supposed to disappear, right? We are not stringifying anything. Okay, we can leave it there. We can just say created. Boom, right. So we now have the post, and then all the others can be handled by this guy for now, right? So we have that, it returns that. But then now when we go to post, it returns, wait, I used the wrong one. This is supposed to be 200. 204 doesn't actually return any content back. So by no content, I mean it doesn't actually allow you to write data like this back to the caller. All you have is access to the status code, and then that's where you can actually check what's happening. But anyway, so we have message created. And then all the others actually being handled as one. So what I want to do right now is, let's say it's a post request. A post we accept, but then if it's not a post, we're going to say it's not found. So let's say maybe our endpoint only allows a post method at that specific endpoint. Well, meanwhile, the other ones actually aren't reachable. So in this case, we're going to have the 404, And then we can remove all of that. And then when we make the request, maybe using get, it can now say not found. As you can see, a requested resource could not be found, meaning that the server is functioning, but the information that I'm looking for is not there. But right now we're only handling one. So let's go ahead and actually duplicate this if statement everywhere else. Then we're going to change the method to match. Let's say delete. Okay, 10:30. Delete. Something looks weird here. Now this is also supposed to be an else. And then we delete that. So we now have 1, 2, 3, 4, right? Post, delete. Let's say maybe this is put. And then the other one is get. So with this is where you're supposed to have the student. Sorry, this is a shorthand, by the way, for doing the same thing we're doing before, where you actually have the key and then value. If you want the key to be, if you want the value to point straight to this guy, meanwhile, the name of the actual variable that you're using is the same key that you want. You can just go ahead and write it like this. So it's actually going to fill in the gaps for you. If you are lazy, but let me not, because this is actually going to lead you guys to a lot of issues sometimes. Let me not be lazy, let me write it in full. So when we're getting, we want to show them the result. When we're putting, I want to see if we can actually update the array. For example, we can say student at 0 equals to corner, and then message is going to be updated, right? And then we're going to return the list of students. So let's save that. For now, we have post, delete, put, and get. All right, so get, we have the list. When we come to where's put, and then we have that updated. We have the updated students with that information. Now, what we want to do is also be able to delete. So for now, we don't have any arguments that we're actually sending to our API. This is kind of like hacking it. We'll still look at how to actually make sure that we what is this? That we are working with information that's actually coming from an actual user. Sorry, sometimes I cannot type and talk at the same time. So in this case, we want to start at 0 and 1. So remember array methods, right? So we have the array methods. Where do you want to start removing and how many items do you want to remove? In this case, we start at 0, we remove 1. So this guy should be popped off. Nope. Let's come back and then now we're going to go to delete and then we send that. Wait a minute, that's supposed to be updated. This should be deleted and then with the list of students. Then let's come back And then now we have that deleted, and then now we have our list of students, Sis, Fifi, and Notes. And then Vukona is gone. So these are the basics of creating a server using Node basics. We are not communicating with any external resource at the moment. So this is, or it should be straightforward. Mahlatsi, I'm requesting for about maybe a 10-minute break. But before we go for a break, do they have any questions?
All right, Vukona. Does anyone have a question for Vukona?
If there's no questions, at least a comment, because I'm also afraid I might be talking to myself at this point.
All right, I'm just going to launch the poll questions, and then they can answer them, and then after 2 minutes, then they can take that 10-minute break and then come back at 10:50.
All right,
Okay. Thank you, Vukona.
my pleasure.
Vukona, are you back? Are you back?
Yes, I am back. But I am worried by the fact that there's actually no questions.
Okay. And then by a show of hands, who's back? Okay, thank you so much. Vukona, you can proceed. They are all back now.
All right. All right. Second.
Vukona, there's a question for you before you start.
Yes.
Mickey is asking, what are the best practices for structuring a scalable Node.js project? Application, I meant to say.
Um, Good question, but I feel like you are kind of getting ahead of, but anyway, I'll answer. So when it comes to that, if it's going to be a huge application, you actually need to look into the MVC approach, whereby you actually have your models different from your views and your controllers. So your logic is actually separate from from your entry points. In this case, everything is actually done on this file, but depending on what it is that you're actually trying to achieve with that specific block of code, then you actually get to separate. That is something that I'm still going to look into, or we are going to be looking into together when we are, I think it's going to be our third session, if not second.
All right, thank you, Vukona. We don't have any other questions. I guess you can proceed with the session.
Okay.
Sorry for interjecting again. It seems as if like Picanho wants to ask a question.
Go
Yes,
ahead.
Picanho. Picanho.
Yeah, I'm so sorry, guys. I accidentally raised my hand. Hello.
Hi.
I'm so sorry. I accidentally raised my hand.
Right, no, that's okay. That's okay. The next part that we're going to be looking at is just being able to identify what is this, one URL from the next and the next and the next. Because right now what we have is it's going to basically be catching all the information that we're going to pass. So as long as it's a post method, it's going to be able to actually get that information. As long as it's a delete method, it's gonna go ahead and try to actually get that information. So how do we handle this next part? Forgot I'm actually not sharing. Let me share my screen again. Okay, yeah, up and running. So what I was saying in terms of this is when we come this side, regardless of what we actually have here, the result is always going to be the same. And that means we basically only allow for requests to actually exist on our application, which is not the standard. That doesn't make sense. So now how do we actually deal with this issue? Well, there's another thing that we actually need to look at. In this case, it's called direct.url, which allows us to actually identify where a URL is, what request is actually being made and on which URL, so which endpoint exactly is receiving that request. So right now I'm just going to come to Postman, come back this side, and it's actually not doing anything. Why is that? Okay, just give me a second. I think something is off here. Oh, come on. Why did it want me to stop it? Sorry about that. I don't know why it didn't want to refresh. So we are currently on the server file. No man. Hey. Okay, so we've got that to come to Postman. Click on that. And then there's our URL, right? So as you can see, it can actually identify what's actually happening. So for now, let's say maybe right now we're actually dealing with student, right? Which means this probably would be on student. And then if it's on students, then you can actually go ahead and do whatever it is that you actually need. So what you can do, there's different ways you can actually do this. You can keep on having different if statements just like this. And then here, just double checking if rec.url matches student. But if all the requests are related to students, it might actually make more sense to just have an if statement outside and then nest the rest of this if statement in that one if statement. So that's what I am going to do so that we don't have to keep on rewriting the same condition everywhere else. And writing it this way also ensures that we have little to no errors, because if we write it like this, we might forget to actually include it in one of the other if statements. So if we just have it right on there, rec.url equals to, so as you can see, it always starts with a forward slash. If you want, you can actually remove the forward slash using code, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to include the forward slash right here. Then if student, otherwise, remember the 404 that I was talking about. So right now we only have this URL that is currently supported. If it's anything else, then we're going to go ahead and actually send a 404. So in this case, that means it's going to be res.status code. And then this is going to be 404. And then res dot end. This is pretty much all that we actually need. All right, so we can come back this side, remove that. And 404 not found, but then when you come to students, we still have access to that information. So this is the basics of it, but obviously you can actually continue having multiple other, this is supposed to be else if, right now I don't even know, but let's say classes. and then else. So right now we are supporting two endpoints, classes as well as the students. So if we have classes, let's just create another let classes equals to what class? Okay, now I'm thinking of school, so let's have that. And then grade 3. So here I don't really care about the method. I'm just going to be I'm just going to be handling everything all at once, right? So all of them, status code is going to be equals to 200 regardless. And then we're going to have the set header, and then we're going to set the content type to JSON, content type, then application JSON. And then we're going to have rest.end, and then JSON.stringify, and then we're going to have our actual classes. So we can send in that object and then set it to classes. So now we have students, we can make a request to students. Remember with classes, it's being handled regardless of what happens in terms of the methods that I'm actually utilizing. So that is there. But if I say the students is class and then this classrooms, if I hit on that, we should get a 404. If we hit teachers, that's also going to be a 404. And obviously, this is not readable, right? This is actually not readable at all. So another thing that you might actually want to do in this case, you might want to create a separate function just for this. And what do we need from this function? We need the res. So what we can actually do is this. Right here, let's create a function called handle student request, students request, or student endpoint actually. Makes more sense. So that is going to be a function. The function requires that. So we're going to get that as an argument, and then we are going to take all of this. Hopefully I'm doing it the right way. If I'm not, then it won't actually stop the server from running. So let's have that, and then we're going to send res, right? And let's go back. So this is students. So we're only hitting the students part. So teachers still for 4. And then we have our students. We come to that. We have an error, which I actually expected. Rec is not defined. Did I send the wrong? Oh, we have rec also. So we're actually supposed to have the request object as well as an argument. So we have that. Let's run again. Second try. And there we go. So might clean our code and it still works. So if the URL is students, let the function go ahead and handle whatever is actually being requested. So you can actually go ahead and do the same thing with all of that. And this is how you can actually optimize your code. But in this case, It's not for performance, it's more for readability, because before you saw it was now congested, it was harder to read. Now at least I know when I come this side, all if statements are referring to the student, and it's a little bit cleaner. But obviously, if you have more functionality in here, whereby now you end up having, let's say it ends up looking like this for one block, it might be smarter to have more functions for separate methods. So I think that's pretty much it in terms of today's session, because I can go on and on, but I also do not want to overwhelm you guys. So I don't know. Do you guys have any questions before we go?
We still don't have any questions.
We still don't have any questions.
Mhm.
That's
The
amazing.
one that they were asking you about, Rosie also assisted with that, but yeah, no other questions.
Okay, since there's no questions, I'm thinking maybe people are actually understanding what's happening. There was something that I was supposed to cover, which currently I am not, but I was thinking of actually covering it in the second session, right? So I'm going to, I think, give it as a task. We have enough days. Today's Thursday, right? Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday. That's enough days, 4 days. And then let us see if they can actually, um, if they can actually solve the challenge, since it seems like they are more than comfortable.
Okay, no problem, Vukona. So have we reached the end of the session, because you said you were supposed to cover something and then you're not covering it now?
Yes, that part is actually, thing is, if I do cover that part, it's like building onto one another. For example, with this, remember you can actually still remove this from here and actually create its own module on the side, and so on and so forth. But I was thinking to actually step into that when we now focus on Express. You can guide me, but I was thinking it would make more sense if we do that when we now focus on Express. We actually go the whole MVC approach.
Okay, yeah, no problem. I think your approach is fine. With like moving on, doing that other part in the next session, because we also just want to see whether they really do understand with the task that you're going to give them, right?
Yebo.
Yes.
Let me just run back through the presentation. I just wanted to double check something, right? That has been done, that has been done. Yeah, I think we can call it a day. Miss Mahlat,
Yes, Vukana.
I think we can call it a day.
Okay,
now.
no problem. Yeah, let's call it a day. Thank you so much, Vukana, for the session. And thank you to everyone who participated in the session, even though you didn't have like a lot of questions this time around. But I believe in the next session, you'll have plenty more questions to ask. And then just expect communication via Slack. And I'll also give you like an invite for the next session, which will be next week, Tuesday. So thank you so much for participating, and see you in the next session. Bye-bye.